Part two of our discussion today, Brian, is our superlatives discussion. And we have, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different quote unquote awards to hand out. And I will tell you this from the get-go. For whatever reason, when we do these types of shows and these types of like awards and giving them out and everything, I look at it more as like a head coach, maybe, where I try to spread the wealth a little bit, and I don't like to give the same person 2 awards, if that makes sense. Now, there are a lot of guys that could fit into these different categories, and maybe you gave out the same, the same player a couple of different awards. I actually crossed out a guy and moved him because I felt like he fit in this other spot better, that kind of stuff. But this is the fun part of the show. Not that the whole show is not fun, but this part right here.
Because we haven't given each other answers.
No, we have not shared.
Because I wanted you to be able to take whatever direction you wanted to go. Like, I don't care about having 2. So like, if my best lineman is also my best player, I'm not going to pick someone else. Like if just hypothetically, let's say you have Riley Mills as your most outstanding player, but then you're not going to have him as your best lineman. Like, you know what I mean? So
I spread it out.
I'm willing to do it, but I'm not going to have it towards like of the non-MOP MVP honors. Those are the 2 that you know I don't count as multiples.
Gotcha.
Like, I'm not going to have a guy be the of the others. I'm kind of with you on. Like, I'm not going to have the top skill player be the top breakout.
Sure.
That's how those things went. But
sure.
The last 2 I kind of am probably, and then also, Vince, at the end of this, there was a super chat that kind of was that kind of ties into this before we jump into the other predictions. So we'll get to those as well before we move on to our actual predictions.
Perfect. So let's just jump into this thing, and we'll just kind of go back and forth, Brian, and let's start with top role player, and that could be someone who it could be a starter, but it also could be somebody who's in the rotation. It could be a defensive lineman, for example. It could be a linebacker who's in the rotation. It could be a wide receiver who's not a technical starter, right? But is for all intents and purposes, a starter because you're in the top 6. It could be one of the running backs, for example. So lots of choices for this one for top role player. What say you, Brian Driscoll?
So on offense, it was Jadarian Price. Because as you said,
defense.
We're going to go offense and defense. Yeah. On offense, for me, Vince, I look at Jadarian Price this way. I think he's going to basically kind of play starter minutes to a degree, but he's not going to be the starter. He's going to be part of a rotation. He's not going to be the guy that gets all the pub. He's not going to be the guy that gets all the love. Pun intended. But he's going to be a very good football player.
Sure.
And I thought about having him in my breakout category, but there's some starters that I am projecting to the breakout category.
Yep.
That's why I went with him here. I think he's going to be a very he's going to be kind of like what Logan Diggs was 2 years ago, where everybody loved Audric. So Logan just constantly got crapped on because he wasn't Audric,
which is one of the reasons
his numbers were very good. Over 800 yards. He had over 1,000 yards of total offense that year. A guy that had over 1,000 yards as a sophomore running back was a guy that some fans were like, I don't care, let him go. Like, okay, well, I think he's pretty flipping good that year. You know what I mean? And so that would be a role player because Audric was there. Chris Tyree started the year at running back, but it was at the end of the day, Logan played a very important role that season. And every time Audric was getting benched for fumbling, Logan stepped in and played well.
Sure.
And so I think Jadarian's going to be a more explosive, better version of what Logan Diggs was in 2022. If that says anything about how good I think he's going to be this season.
Sure.
For Notre Dame.
Well, I didn't have an offensive guy written down, so I just now wrote one down. And I initially, Jadarian Price is a great answer for this because I think it is going to be a 1A, 1B, and choose who your A and B are going to be from a game-to-game basis. Like that's what I'll say to that. I went a different direction just because I want to talk about somebody else. And so I went with Jordan Faison. I don't think he's actually going to start because I think right now they're trying to figure out kind of where they can get him on the field the most, right? Because they've got him at field. We know what he can do in the slot. I think he's going to kind of be a bit of a Swiss Army knife for this wide receiving core. And, you know, he did break out, I guess, quote unquote, the last few games of the season and did some great things for Notre Dame. Obviously got himself off of walk-on status and became a scholarship player, all of those awesome things. But I still think he's going to be kind of the forgotten man from a defensive game plan standpoint, because there's a lot of other names in this wide receiving core who I think we're probably going to get named first as guys that you need to game plan against. And I think that's going to give a great opportunity for number 6 to make some plays and to be a guy.
Do you factor in the potential that he also adds on special teams into this equation too? Like if he's a returner, that only factors into his impact because he's an offensive player. Do you kind of count that as something different?
That's a very interesting piece of it, because I do think he is going to end up being the punt returner. And I think he's going to be a very good punt returner. He only returned, I think, 2 punts last year. And I think one went for 20 yards or something like that. I mean, you're more the stat guy than I am, but I think that's what I remember. And I think he could be dynamic as a punt returner, right? We know what Harrison can do as a kick returner because it's a different skill set, right? I think Jordan Faison, with his lacrosse background and what he has to do with his legs in a lacrosse game, I think that makes him perfectly suited for a punt return man as well. And so maybe he doesn't have it all the time, but I think he's going to be a dynamic punt returner. So that's definitely part of the equation for sure.
Let's go to newcomer next, Vince, and we're going to take newcomer in 2 different directions.
We didn't do role player for defense yet.
Oh my gosh! See, I'm the one that was wanting to do both, and I completely forgot. Let's go defense. Who's your so you're when you were just thinking we were going to do one, you had a defensive player, obviously. So who would that be?
Well, and
who it is
probably not going to surprise you very much because I'm very high on what he's going to do this year, and it's Josh Burnham. He's not penciled in as the starter. He's penciled in as a backup. And I love his motor. I love what he has done physically to his body to adapt to being on the defensive line and being a contributor this year. I just think he's so twitchy coming off the ball. I just think he's going to be a dynamic player on the edge for Notre Dame this year. And I am super excited to see what Josh Burnham can do. I think he's going to be a guy that they're going to be putting out there in the big moments. I think that's when it's all said and done, I think you're going to see Burnham out there in the big moments. So I think he's my role player of the year on defense.
I went Jalen Sneed.
Okay.
And the reason I went Jalen Sneed is I don't think he's going to be a starter. Like he's going to be maybe the starting rover, but like as we saw last year, the starting rover's not in the top 11 in regard to snaps.
Right.
I think Jalen Sneed is going to be a little bit of a do-it-all player for Notre. He's going to be in the rotation at linebacker. He'll start at times at rover. He'll come in maybe at times at will, and he's going to be a third down pass rusher. He's going to do a little bit of everything for this defense. That is the very definition of a role player.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So a lot of times people think role player, they think, well, not a guy that doesn't matter as much. For me, Vince, a role player as a coach, role players are vital.
Oh, yeah.
To your success.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I look at Jalen Sneed, I think he's going to be sort of a jack of all trades, do a little bit of everything kind of guy. Now that he's a junior, he's been more motivated. He looks thick. He looks stronger. I don't know that he looks necessarily that much bigger, but he looks stronger than he did. And he's been more locked in so far than I've ever seen him. Now, again, we're not even at a halfway point of camp, right? But from what I've seen of Jalen Sneed, I think he's ready to give you something important this year. Now, is he ready to have like a big national breakout season? That I don't see. But we're going to look back and be like, he's going to be I'll put it this way. He's going to be a better playmaking version of Danny Spond. Remember in 2012, nobody really talked about Danny Spond. But if you go back and watch those games, he was so important to that 2012 defense as that what they call that, the dog, I think he was the dog.
Yeah.
Right? Was the field side outside guy. And then the cat was the boundary. Like that was Shembo. I believe it might've been the other one. Danny Spahn never got love, but he was so important to that team as a role player. And I think that's what Jalen Sneed's going to bring this year. Right. And we've seen flashes of it in the past. I think but that's all they're going to need him to do is in spurts. I don't see him being an every down player, but in spurts, I think the staff has finally figured out too, Vince, how to use him.
Right.
Like, this is what he's good at. This is what he isn't good at. So let's make sure we're using him in areas where he's good at.
Right.
And you weren't going to justify taking Marist or J.D. Bertrand off the field last year to find a role for Jalen Snead. You just weren't going to, because he was going to put himself in some bad spots. You're going to be more willing to accept that this year, but I also don't think he's going to be as undisciplined as he was last year. And that's why he gets my pick.
Cool. I like it. I dig it. Next category, top newcomer. And we split this into two different parts. We've got top newcomer as a transfer and top newcomer as a freshman. Okay. Yeah. So we got two different ways to go. So top newcomer as a transfer. What say you?
This one's kind of easy for me, and I love the group of newcomers they have. I love Chris Mitchell. I think it was a huge pickup. I love what Bo Collins is doing. Like every time I talk to a source, and I just talked to another source yesterday that was at the most recent scrimmage.
Okay.
And I asked this person how the team looked. And this is not a person that normally watches the offense. This is a person that watches the defense. And I'm going to read you exactly the very first thing they said to me. Receivers are legit. I've heard that from so many different people close to the program. And you keep hearing that. So and a big part of that is the newcomers. I mean, yes, Great House is having a great offseason. It's Faison. But the speed between, and Jaden Harrison, I didn't mention he's another one that brings some juice to the table.
Yep.
I talked to another source recently that was at a practice, and he was like, I don't know what they're going to do with this guy, but they got to figure something out to get this guy to football, because he's just electric. Now, again, he doesn't look like a natural receiver, but man, when you get involved, if you can eliminate all the stuff between the snap and him getting the ball and just focus on what he can do with him, he's going to be electric. But I think Riley Leonard is, at the end of the day, the guy that's easily the most impactful and most talented and best newcomer in the portal, through the portal. That's a no-brainer for me. I mean, he's a guy that I believe has first-round NFL draft pick potential. Now, will he get to that this year? Don't know.
Sure.
But he is a very talented quarterback. He's bigger. We were talking about this in practice the other day. It was me, you, and Steyer standing next to him. Like, you really don't notice how big he is until you actually see him up in person. Like, he's tall and long, but
he's a big boy.
And he's very athletic. That was the next thing that this person told me, is Leonard's fast. And he's improving as a passer. He's going to have really good weapons around him. I just think he's going to be, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be a very dynamic player for Notre Dame. Very dynamic player.
That's a great answer. I have Riley Leonard in a different slot, and so my rules. I don't put him in multiple slots, and that's just because I like to be different.
So he won't be the best newcomer, but he's going to be one of. Okay, makes sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense to you. That's okay.
That was called sarcasm. Thought I was landing pick. But who is your pick, though, Vince?
So I am in the same neighborhood as where you were. I have Chris Mitchell as my top newcomer. I think that. He has #1 receiver written all over him. I mean, I know that he hasn't done it at the Notre Dame level. I get all of that. But it's a receiver. Like, I don't think that matters
Vince,
to me.
I got to interrupt. Sorry. He only played one game against a Power 5 team last year.
And he dominated it.
I mean, so what if it was on the road against an SEC team and he had 6 catches for 157 yards?
Right. Thank you.
That's called sarcasm again. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's coming through in the show, but that's also called sarcasm.
Yes. But I just think that he is going to be smooth. He is going to be consistent. And like I said, he's got #1 receiver written all over him, which then allows for guys like Jaden Greathouse, Bo Collins, Jaden Harrison, Faison. It allows them to do some things because, I think Chris Mitchell has all the potential to be that guy that gets bracketed, for example. And then you, of course, bring in the tight ends and what they can do athletically and in the pass game. I think he's going to be instrumental in the passing game. And, of course, I know the guy who's throwing him the ball, but I'm sure he is very excited about the fact that he's got these 3 guys that have come in and have just really opened up the wide receiver room and allowed them as a whole to be legit and be dogs, right? And so that's why I picked Chris Mitchell.
I mean, honestly, Vince, I wouldn't have cared who you picked if you picked a receiver.
Yeah.
I mean, meaning like they're all so good.
Oh, I could have made a case for all 3 of them.
Yes.
To be perfectly honest with you. I really could have.
They all bring something dynamic to the table.
Right.
Like, and I've said this before, like Chris Mitchell's my big concern. Or not Chris Mitchell, excuse me. Jaden Harrison's my big concern if I'm looking at it from the standpoint of – looking at a guy that that is he really a receiver?
Right.
Like, does he really like have that kind of ability? Does he really have, like, yes, he's a great return guy and all these other kind of things, but he's really kind of, that type of player? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know, like I said before, once he gets the ball in his hands, he's electric. Just dynamic. If you'd have gone with Bo Collins, I'd have been like, cool, man, I get it.
Yeah.
I think Bo could end up being the best of all of the receivers for a host of reasons, including it. But I want to point something out real quick about your pick of Chris Mitchell. Last year, Arkansas, who's not a great SEC team, as was pointed out in the chat, faced off against Luther Burden. It faced off against the kid that got drafted, Ricky Pearsall from Florida, who got drafted, I think, in second or third round last year. Also played against Alabama last season, and they had drafted receiver. Played against Ole Miss, who had Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins, right? Guys that are going to be high draft picks. Played against Texas A&M and that group of receivers, Evan Stewart, who everybody raves about. Played against LSU with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas last season. And so all those SEC teams, there's only 3 receivers that went over 100 yards against Arkansas. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Chris Mitchell. That's it.
Right.
That's the list. And Thomas had 5 catches for 133 yards. Malik Neighbors had 8 catches for 130 yards. Chris Mitchell had 6 catches for 157 yards. So I just thought it was kind of smart to point that out.
Right.
That, there's some other really good receivers that played against them with much better quarterbacks and much better supporting casts to take the pressure off of Chris Mitchell. And nobody did what Chris Mitchell did against them last year. He had the most yards that Arkansas gave up the entire year, despite them playing 2 first-round – hold on. Is it 3 first-round picks at receiver? Well, 3 eventually, because they also played against Luther Burden, who had 6 catches for 55 yards against Arkansas. Theo Weiss had 1 catch for 15 yards. Ricky Pearsall, who I believe was a second or third round pick, had 5 catches for 55 yards against Arkansas. So, you got to show you can do it week after week after week, but the guy's pretty flipping good.
Exactly.
And there's a reason
we've
that
seen
Notre Dame
it.
went and got
I mean, exactly. we've seen it. I'm
Right.
not gonna lie to you, because I didn't want to disappoint a lot of the people out there who love my affinity for special teams. Mitch Jeter was in the neighborhood of being picked for this spot. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I mean, you could kind of go there. I mean,
look, I know, and I had a whole argument ready to go.
Newcomer, when you talk about newcomer,
right?
They've got a new transfer at punter, a new transfer at kicker, and a new transfer in the return game.
And that's the other thing about Rendell is I didn't know if he was classified as a transfer or as a freshman. I assume he went to college in Australia, but I'm not.
Yes, he did. He didn't.
Sure.
I don't know that he played football there because they have a different thing. But yeah, by the way, I was wrong. Ricky Pearsall was a first-round pick of the Niners. The chat is pointed out. So they played against 3 first-round picks at receiver last year, and none of them had as many yards against Arkansas as Chris Mitchell did.
I think Mitch Jeter is going to lower the heart rates of a lot of people out there just because he's so consistent. He's so consistent, and that's huge for Notre Dame, to be honest with you. If they ever come into a position where a field goal is going to make a difference in a game, I feel very good about Notre Dame's chances to kick that field goal and to go between the uprights.
Yes.
So
100%.
He was right there for me. I'm not gonna lie.
100%.
Right there.
100%. So, Vince, when newcomer special teams, I would go with Mitch Jeter as well in the transfer portal. And that's saying you've got an All-American coming back at kick return or coming in as a kick returner.
Sure.
It's just, to your point, you're going to have a much bigger impact as a place kicker than you will as a return man.
Right.
You're going to score more points. You're going to be in more clutch moments, all those kind of things.
Right.
So, yeah, I would go there with him. How about newcomer in the freshman class or on transfer newcomer on defense, Vince?
Oh, we're going both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
See, I didn't even do both sides of the ball for any of it. It's fine.
During my rant, my long things, be looking ahead and thinking about
I got you.
Because I did say that I wanted to do offense and one defense. So.
It's all good, brother. So our options are fairly limited defensively, right? It's either
there's Rod Hurd,
and Jordan Clark,
and RJ Oben.
Forgot about RJ Oben.
3 starters.
Yeah. No, I forgot about RJ Oben.
Three pretty good ones. So
I think RJ Oben is going to be really, really good at his spot. I think just because he comes in with more experience, you know, at that position. But I'm still going to go with Rod Hurd. I feel very good about what I've seen from Rod Hurd in practice. I feel good about the experience that he has coming in. I think that he is going to play off of Xavier Watts very, very well. And I also think, and this might be a point that is not obvious on the field per se, I think he's going to be a very, very good example for a Don Schuler. I think having him as a veteran presence there kind of takes some pressure off of a Don Schuler. He doesn't have to be the starter. He doesn't have to be the man next to an All-American. He can just be himself, right? And so I think that trickle-down effect is actually going to be also very, very important as well. So I'm going to go with Rod Hurd here.
I did too. That's my pick. For all the things you said, I think it's a smart pick. A smart pick. I mean, like, I like RJ Oben. He's going to be very good. Jordan Clark's going to be very steady for them, I hope. But I think Rod Hurd has a chance to be an impact player. I do. Of the three, he gives me the most. I think he's going to be an impact player vibes. But I would rank it this way: Hurd, Oben, Clark is the ranking I would give the three of those guys.
I would too.
If I was predicting the who's going to have the biggest impact of the transfers.
Me too.
What would you do offensively? I would probably go Leonard. I'd probably go Leonard, Collins, Mitchell, Harrison. You would probably go Leonard.
Yeah.
Right. Let's just take away your thing. Leonard, Mitchell, Collins, Harrison.
Harrison. Yeah. Okay. Just strictly offensively. Yes. Correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's go freshman, Vince. Who's your pick for the most impactful freshman on offense for Notre Dame?
So this is not as difficult as it may sound, because you're like, okay, well, which freshmen are actually going to be, you know, impactful offensively this season? You know, which one is it? Micah Gilbert? Is it one of the running backs? You know, could you see a tight end get in there? Right. Like, you know, that's definitely a possibility. If what we're seeing in practice is a possibility. I went into the backfield, Brian, and I had a hard time between which guy, Aeneas Williams or Kedron Young, I was going to go with, especially after your visual of the pass blocking. But I am going to go with Kedron Young here. I think he has the best opportunity to be that, to find a niche someplace in that, whatever that 8-man starting rotation that he's got, you know, that Coach McCullough has. You know, he tries to fit different guys in there. So I'm going to go with Kedron Young, although Micah Gilbert was a very, very close second for me, because I think maybe about halfway through the season, he could break into or expand that wide receiver rotation, because I think they're going to start with 6. I feel very confident about the 6, but I think he's at 7 and knocking on the door pretty loudly. And, you know, it's like any coach, right? In a big game, your rotation shrinks, right? I think in A&M, I think that rotation is smaller, you know, and I don't think they're going to necessarily, you know, give him that opportunity against A&M, but then the consecutive games after that is where he could start to find maybe a little bit of a niche, you know, getting in there. But, you know, and I don't know how much Kedron Young is actually going to be on the field necessarily against Texas A&M, to be honest with you. But to pick a freshman, he's the one I went with.
I don't know that any of the freshmen are going to see much time against Texas A&M.
Yep.
Against A&M. I don't know. I went with Micah Gilbert just because.
Okay. Yeah, I get that.
I had a hard time with this one because part of me wanted to go with one of the running backs, as you went with. Part of me wanted to go with projecting that there's going to be an injury that's going to force Kirby Lambert into the lineup, you know, like a Joe Alt type of thing. Andrew Gilmore in the chat projects a potential injury, and so that's why he went with Anthony Knapp. Right. So, like, you know,
oh, wow.
You know, so like I thought about going that route with Gerby, but at the end of the day, I'm just going, okay, if there's no injuries to anyone, what happens? Because, like, if there's one injury at running back, immediately one of those freshmen becomes, you know, like the easy pick.
Right.
So I'm not projecting that because I don't know who it's going to be.
Sure.
Micah Gilbert was my pick just because I think he's going to eventually force himself into the rotation. I watched that kid play, and I'm just like, God, you got to find a way to get that guy in the field. Like Cam Williams has the potential to be a star, but Cam is still very much learning the position.
Yep.
Micah looks like a veteran. Like Micah and Jaden Greathouse go through drills and run routes like they're juniors and seniors in college. They're very advanced players, and I think that's going to help Micah. Like I don't anticipate him being the best freshman overall from this team, but I think he'll be the best freshman in year 1 from this team. After that, I kind of lean towards Kedron as my next pick, with Aeneas really close behind.
Yep.
And if there's an injury like Andrew Gilmore's talking about, then I do think we could see a freshman maybe. Because like honestly, if one of the 2 tackles goes down, you almost are forced to put a freshman in. If it's an injury that's going to cost multiple games. So I'm going to go there. I just think Micah Gilbert. It's easier to get a 6th receiver into a game than it is a 3rd or a 4th running back with some consistency. That's kind of the way I looked at it, because I think the first 2 running backs are going to eat up a lot more of the touches this year than the number 3 running back had last year.
Sure, I agree.
That's part of it as well.
And that's the thing. It's like I probably would have been more confident in the Kedron Young pick if the pass blocking didn't occur the other day that you were watching. And
but I mean, it was again, it's like practice 9.
Oh, I totally get it. Yeah,
and he missed all spring. Right.
It'll be interesting. But I do agree with that fact that the 2 top guys could steal some of those 3rd guy reps in there. Completely agree with that. Yeah, completely.
I could see a scenario where, so like in my head, Vince, I'm also going with guys that are making an impact in meaningful downs. I could see a scenario one of the backup running back rushes for like 400 or so yards, but a lot of it's like
in junk time.
You come in the 4th quarter and rip off a couple big runs and things like that as well. I think Micah is gonna have the biggest impact on day 1. But I had a tough time with this one because I really struggled with him and Kedron and Aeneas. And of course I wanted to go with Gerby but that was more wishful thinking.
Yeah,
than anything else.
100%. Yes, I agree with that completely. I don't see that being the case because I just don't see. Yeah, I agree.
Somebody in the chat asked about what happened to Cam Williams. Nothing's happened to him. He's just raw, and he's at a position where there's depth. I think a little bit more established. You've got he's at Z. There's Chris Mitchell. You've got Jordan Faison there. You've got KK Smith there. It's just a little bit more established and less injury history there. Whereas with Micah, also this was a small factor because, like I said, I try to keep injury out. But I look at it and I'm like, it's Jaden Thomas, Bo Collins, and him. Jaden can kind of move all over, but Jaden and Bo have both had injury problems in their entire careers. So that could open up some things a little bit as well. But I just think Micah Gilbert just has really impressed me with what he's shown so far. What about your freshman on defense, Vince? Who's your pick there? This one to me is even tougher because I think there's a couple freshmen that are going to play a lot this year. There's 2 of them in particular.
To me, this one was easy.
Okay,
to be perfectly honest with you, and it's KVA, Kingston Viliamasa. I understand where you're coming from. Maybe
that was my pick, by the way, as well. But
defensive line, there's a chance. And
Bryce Young's going to play.
Yeah, and maybe one of those one of the corners steps up and has to be in that rotation.
Leonard Moore potentially,
right. So I see where you're coming from. I think
I also think about potentially the impact of Sean Sevillano. Maybe earning like a short yardage goal line role where he has some impactful minutes, and he's an injury away from stepping into the nose as well. So, those are the 4 that the 4 that I considered.
Yes, I get that.
Yeah,
and I feel like it came down to me between Bryce Young and KVA. Here's the reason I went with KVA. I think he's going to get more early opportunities, and I think Bryce is ascending. Don't get me wrong, but there's so much talent on the defensive line right now. I'm still very curious to see where he kind of fits in that rotation, what that looks like, things like that. And we talked about, freshmen on the offensive side probably not seeing a lot of playing time, if any, at Texas A&M. KVA and Bryce Young, I think, are going to play, and they're going to play in that first game. KVA for sure. Bryce Young, we'll see how it looks and where he lands on the depth chart. But KVA is going to play. And I think that he has really rocketed up the depth chart. We'll see what that rotation looks like too.
Well, I don't know that I would say he's necessarily rocketed up it. He just kind of stepped on campus and he was a 2.
Yeah, well,
because of some of the depth issues where he plays. Sure. But he was going to be there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
He was going to earn that anyway. Like I looked at it like this, Vince. I went with the same pick you did. I went with Kingston Viliamasa. And the reason why is I think Bryce Young's going to play a lot this year. I think Kingston is immediately day one, like game one, Texas A&M, the number 2 Mike, and maybe the 3rd overall linebacker off the bench, potentially. Like Mike or Will. I could see a scenario where eventually he's doing that. He's going to make an impact, in my opinion. But it was closer for me because I don't think either of them are going to play a million snaps, barring injury. Because, again, I'm trying to keep injuries out of it as much as I can.
Me
like,
too.
A little small, tiny factor with Micah Gilbert. But overall, I'm not trying to project injuries on this particular one. And just kind of going with what we know, I think Kingston plays more. And playing linebacker allows him to have more of an every down impact than Bryce. But I could also see a scenario, Vince, where by the 3rd or 4th game of the year, Bryce Young's part of their nickel package over the guard.
Sure.
And he's just, you know what I mean? And he's, he's having an Aaron Lynch type of rookie season where he's 5 sacks. So, I mean, it was a little tougher for me between those two. And then there's some separation, and Leonard Moore was kind of my next thought. But I don't know that they would go to a 4th corner that early. If, right now, I think it'd probably be the 3. But, but he's the guy that I could see force his way into the rotation. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, Leonard Moore had 3 picks this year and, ended up being a really important backup kind of thing. So, those were really my main ones. Sevillano, afterthought, but still at least considered it. Those 3, and I think Kingston is at the top of the list for me, just as more of an effective every down player, and more of he's a 2 where Bryce is a 3 right now. That's a factor on as well. And I did not take into account special teams. A lot of people in the chat are taking special teams, and I don't think it's as much of a no-brainer on special teams because I could very much see Bryce Young being a Isaiah Foskey type of guy. As remember his first year in the rotation where he didn't play a whole lot and they put him on special teams and he's long and athletic and all that. I could see Bryce blocking a kick. I think both of those guys could make an impact on special teams. But I would agree that if you're going to count special teams, Kingston's probably going to be more of a every unit starter type of guy than Bryce Young might just make an impact on one of them. That's kind of where I'm at. So that would be my pick as the top newcomer on defense. So we've had what, 2, 3 so far that were the same top? No, you went different role player. Did you go with Jadarian on your top role player on offense?
Faison.
Okay, so we agreed on the 2 defensive newcomers. That's the one we've agreed on so far. Good. Okay, good stuff.
Top lineman is next on the list, Brian. So defensively, let's start on the defensive side of the ball. Who's your top lineman?
Riley Mills. Look, I'll be short and simple. You guys know how much I think of Riley Mills as a talent. Well, you guys also know that I very much have said he's got to show it on an every down basis.
Sure.
I just think he is. This is a projection pick for me. I just think he's poised for a dominant year. I think he's going to be their best overall defensive lineman. Numbers wise, impact wise, how teams have the game plan for him. I think by the time we get to Florida State's biggest concern is how do we block 99. I think that's going to be how it goes. Now they're both going to be very good. But I just have a feeling this is the breakout for Riley Mills. So that's my pick there.
And I had the same pick. So I'm right with you. He's got all the potential in the world. I think he came back for a reason. I think he's on a mission. And I think he is absolutely going to break out this year. I'm very excited to see what Riley Mills does. So that was my pick as well. Offensively, I have a feeling we're going to be the same here as well, but I will let you pick your offensive lineman of the year.
This might have been a little tougher if Jagasol didn't get hurt.
Agreed.
And I still don't think it's a no-brainer because I think Ashton Craig could be in this conversation as well, but I'm going Billy Schrauth.
That's who
and just what we saw from him in the spring, what we've seen from him so far in fall camp.
Yeah.
He's just physically way better than anybody else that's in the starting lineup right now. Just his combination of athleticism, power. He's got experience. I'm going with him. My number 2 would probably be Ashton Craig.
Yep, me too. Look, I have never hid my love for Ashton Craig. I think he's going to be very, very good. I love his athleticism. I think he's going to be a really, really good center. I really, really do. But Billy Schrauth is just Billy Schrauth. Like I couldn't in good conscience not pick Billy Schrauth here, even though I love Ashton Craig and what I think he's going to do. And it would have been a projection pick, but I just can't go past Billy Schrauth. I mean, he's the pick.
Hey, Vince, that was the Cam Hart fan club calling.
I knew it.
And they're very concerned about your recent infatuation with Ashton Craig, and they're wondering if maybe you're kind of fading away from that. If, like, Cam's now at the NFL and you've now turned your back on him a little bit. But
I mean, I have to focus on Notre Dame, but I'm still waiting for my my Cam Hard Chargers jersey so that I can rock that on Sundays. But
now you could be right. Here's my sleeper for top lineman. You want to hear? Here's my sleeper pick.
Okay,
Rocco Spindler.
Okay.
Now I'm not going there now, but if he does enough, because I think Joe Rudolph wants to start Pat Coogan. That's what I think he
completely agree. Completely agree.
If Rocco does enough to force Joe Rudolph to start him, I think Rocco could be in line for a really good
because
season.
he'd almost have to do more.
Yeah.
He has to be markedly better than Coogan to start, I think, right now. I mean, it has to be obvious to everybody. That's the position that I think that he's in. And you're right. If he does end up winning that battle because of that, then I think there's a really good chance that he has a breakout year. Yeah, I could see that.
I'm hoping that at the end of the year, the answer is actually Tosh Baker. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, that would be fantastic. That would, I mean, you want to talk about solidifying a line, that would definitely do it. So, top skill player is our next one. And I will say,
quarterback does not count in this one. Did you have a quarterback on yours? Okay, you can keep a quarterback on yours, Vince. I was trying to save you from not having a QB because I thought you'd have a QB on a later one. So if you had a QB, you can go with that one.
So I was going to say my difficulty here was trying to stick to my own rule and not having more than one person, or more than one award for one person, right? And so I just bit the bullet, and I because originally I didn't have an offensive player here. Okay, I only had a defensive player.
Would it help you to stick to your own rule if I do say you can't have a quarterback here, because then you could have the quarterback for something later?
It would, but then I don't know who else I would go with because I've got other skill players.
Let me kick it off, and I think you're going to be on board with me. Okay,
hit me.
My top skill player this year is going to be in skill players: running back, receiver, tight end. That's how in Notre Dame's offense I view those as skill players.
Fair enough.
It's Jeremiah Love.
Okay.
Like that's my top skill player, just because he's going to do everything for Notre Dame. He's going to be a top rusher. He's going to be a pass catcher. He's going to be a home run weapon. I just think he is going to be. And in my head, I'm not counting quarterback as a skill player this conversation.
Yeah, no, I get that,
because we have that guy in some other areas. But he is a skill player. The quarterback would be. I'm just going Jeremiah Love. I just think he's going to be just a really impactful difference maker type of guy.
I've got Jeremiah later for a different award. So I'm not going to pick Jeremiah Love. I'm not sure who I'm going to go with here. I had Riley Leonard written down because I assumed he was going to be a skill player.
Yeah, go with it.
Yeah.
Good. Go with it. I didn't tell you it couldn't be beforehand, so you can pick one now.
Look, Riley Leonard is going to be the catalyst for whether this offense is what we think the offense could be. I mean, and I know that's obvious because he's the quarterback, and I get that, but it still doesn't make it not true. You know what I mean? He will be the reason that the run game is effective early on, okay, because they're still trying to figure out offensive line and how that's going to go. He is going to be the reason that the passing game is what it is, okay? Now, are there other quarterbacks that can throw and do some? Yes, there are, but he's the best combination that they have, and he's dynamic in both, in my opinion. And so he's the top skill player for me. And yeah, that's why I went with him. So, just breaking rules. It's what I do.
That's all good, man. It's all good. How about defense, Vince?
Yeah. For me, this one was a no-brainer. I went with Benjamin Morrison. I mean, this is the one spot where I put him. He had to be a top of the hill guy because he is a top of the hill guy. Like Ben Morrison, maybe he's not going to have the stats and all of these different, it doesn't matter. His stat is going to be, don't throw in my direction or you're going to regret it. Like that's his stat. And he's still going to be that dude in the secondary. And so he is my top skill guy for that spot.
Same. I just think he's going to be excellent, even if he misses the opener. And I don't anticipate him missing the opener.
I don't either.
I think Benjamin's poised for just a monster season. I really do. He's a very focused young man. Like I don't think he cares about like all the press clippings. I think he's just locked in on being the best player he can be.
Yeah.
And this was not as easy as I thought, because you have Xavier Watts, who's a dynamic player, and
100%.
And I count linebackers in this conversation as well. So I thought about Jack Kaiser, thought about Drake Cohen, You know, but at the end of the day, I just think Benjamin Morrison is going to be their best football player. I think Benjamin Morrison could be their best football player, period. Like entire team, he could end up being your best player.
Correct.
And so he certainly is the best skill player for me. So that one was an easy one for me as well.
Breakout player. Now, we've talked about breakout players in the past, and we always talked about how we have the different levels of breakout players and things like that. And this one is going to be the top level of breakout player. Okay. So it's going to be somebody that, you know, could have contributed last year, but is going to break out as one of the better players on the team, get national recognition, you know, that kind of stuff. Not saying they're going to go out and win a national award, but national recognition. Like when they talk about Notre Dame, they're going to talk about these guys. And so that's kind of the threshold here. So since you went first last time, I'll lead off here, just to kind of go back and forth. So my breakout player offensively is somebody that you've already talked about for all the same reasons. It's Jeremiah Love. I think he is going to be on the mind and the lips of national people, and it's not going to take long. His skill set is amazing, and he is going to help this offense. He is going to at times bail out the offense, I think. And he is also at times going to put the offense on his shoulders. Like he has the ability to do all of that. And, you know, pass game, run game, all of it. I'm a huge Jeremiah Love fan, and I think he is going to carry the torch for this offense at times.
I'm going same class, different position.
Okay.
I'm going Jaden Greathouse.
Nice.
He's also partly why I'm not predicting any of the other receivers for anything else. Right, just because I think he's going to become the guy. Now, your role player thing's a different conversation, but like for sure. Look, I've been on this kick for a while. I'm going to be on it till I get proven wrong or proven right. I just think Jaden Greathouse is going to be their best receiver this year, and he also has always just struck me as a guy that's always going to be at his best in the biggest moments.
Right,
and I just think that's going to help him a lot this year too. He may not lead the team in catches, he may not lead the team in receptions, but he's going to be their best receiver. And he's a guy that caught 16, 18 passes last year. So I think he's going to see a huge jump in production, and he's just going to be their best receiver. I need to see that he's not, you know, and what we saw from him in the spring was just like, it was so 100%. Very clear that he was their best receiver. Now, again, we didn't see it. They didn't have Bo Collins in the spring, and Jaden Thomas was banged up in the spring, and Jordan Faison was playing lacrosse. I get all that, but just, they did have Chris Mitchell there. And KK and those other guys, and I just felt Jaden Greathouse was clearly their best receiver. Now, the thing that's encouraged me, there's two things that have encouraged me, and they go hand in hand. Number one is Jaden has built on his spring so far in fall camp from what we've seen. Okay. Number two, he's not so significantly their best guy now as he was in the spring because Chris Mitchell's getting more comfortable and because Bo Collins
arrived.
And because Jordan Faison's there. Like, it's not as obvious it was. And Jaden Thomas has had a really good fall camp.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
So, like, a lot of the things that made it, it's like he was so much better than everybody else. Thomas was injured. Chris Mitchell was kind of still feeling his way into the offense. No Bo Collins and no Faison. And he was so clearly their best receiver. He hasn't taken a step back at all. It's just overall the rest of the room is elevated in fall camp. So, that's a good thing. But I still think at the end of the day, he's their best. He's their best. He's their best receiver and will be the breakout for Notre Dame. It's kind of like you, Vince. Like, it's like, okay, skill player. If my top skill player is Jeremiah Love, how's he not? Because I don't know that Jeremiah Love breaking out is going to surprise as many people as Jaden Greathouse. I think it's almost assumed by people that Jeremiah Love's going to break out.
That's fair.
So that's kind of why I went this direction.
Defensively, I'll let you lead this one off. Who do you think is going to be the breakout player on defense?
This is the one award, the one superlative that I could not go with just one guy.
Oh,
and so I'm going with one position, sort of, but I'm not going with one guy. Look, man, there's going to be sort of a almost like a law firm type of situation, right? Like B&B, you know what I mean? Trial attorneys, it's going to be B&B. It's Boubacar and Burnham. I just think their addition to this lineup is going to have such an impact on this football team. If those two kids are and they're almost going to be somewhat indistinguishable from another because of that impact that I think they're going to have.
Okay.
Josh is going to be more of the all-around guy. I think Boubacar is going to be the flashy pass rusher, but they're going to be two guys that make a ton of plays on the defensive line. And adding them to the line compared to what it was last year is going to be something that, to me, elevates this overall defensive line to where it's just going to be special. It's going to be elite. And I think it's almost sort of it needs to be them as well, in my opinion, just for how I view this season, because that's the one thing that was lacking from this football team last year, was that really dynamic edge rusher. You know, like yes, Javonte Jean-Baptiste did some really nice things, and he was good in the biggest moments, but he wasn't a guy that struck fear into your hearts.
Right.
I think Boubacar and Burnham have a chance to be even more dynamic and impactful as pass rushers. And if they bring that, I mean, I have these two kids, you know, in my season projections combining for 10 sacks. As a duo, not each one individually, but as a duo. I think they're going to add 10 plus sacks to this defensive line, and I think that's going to be huge. There's a lot of B's that are important in this defensive situation, Vince. I mean, Burnham, Boubacar, Patelho, Bowen. You know, like, it's just it's great. It's a great name to have, right? Benjamin. You know, I mean, just a lot of B's. A lot of B's. Bryce. You know,
I'll just
a lot
let
of
you
B's
go.
in there, man.
It's gonna let you go.
It's a lot of B's. A lot of B's.
So my defensive breakout player is Christian Gray. I think that he's going to take a major step this year. And because of everything I said about Benjamin Morrison and how they're going to avoid him, I think Christian Gray is going to have an opportunity to really make a splash. So,
problem is, Vince, he has no B in his name.
I know.
I'm going to have to reach out to Chandra and ask if his middle name starts with a B.
I bet you it says on his, like on his thing. I'm going to have to look now. Yeah, they usually have their middle names like under the personal, but anyway. So bottom line is, I think Christian Gray is set up beautifully to make an impact this year and become just an absolute breakout player. He's going to make some plays that I think are, I mean, he already has made plays that you're just like, okay, wow. And now he's going to get more of an opportunity to make even more of those plays. Yeah, I'm excited about what Christian Gray is going to be able to do.
I'm actually texting his mom right now.
To find out what his middle name is?
Yes, to find out what his middle name is.
If it starts with a B, I'm done. I'm out. I'm out. It's going to be a mic drop moment.
That's a good pick, Vince. That's a very good pick. Like, very good pick. And unlike the others, he's got a better shot to start, in my opinion.
True. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we're kind of getting to our big ones now. So, most outstanding on offense.
Am I going to start?
Yeah, I can if you want.
No, usually you're like, okay, here's where we're going. And I'm like waiting on you to like, okay, lead into it. So most outstanding and most valuable are two different things to me. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when people don't confuse valuable. Like, you know, when they talk about like, oh, the NFL MVP, and it's like, this guy had this many yards and this many stats.
That's most outstanding.
Like, that's most outstanding. This is most valuable. Valuable means you take this guy off the team who is the most valuable.
Correct.
Combined with dominant. I mean, there needs to be a level of dominance, but most valuable.
Yep.
And so
I feel very good about my pick.
Pat Mahomes is a better quarterback than Josh Allen, but I think Kansas City could win a lot more games without Pat Mahomes than Buffalo could win without Josh Allen. Right. So that's the debate right there.
Okay.
And so for me, my most outstanding is very obvious. It's Riley Leonard. I think he's going to be their best offensive football player. I think his ability to dominate the run, dominate the pass, how teams have to defend him, he's just going to be an impact player. And it was not necessarily an easy pick because of Jeremiah Love and Jaden Greathouse and Chris Mitchell and all these other players. But when I just think about who is the most dominant football player they have, I think it's Riley Leonard. I think for this season, I think that's who it's going to be. If he's healthy for all season, I think he's going to be a big-time player for Notre Dame. And I don't even mean most valuable. I mean most outstanding. He's going to be their most dominant football player, is my opinion.
Well, I picked a guy who is going to be catching passes from Riley Leonard, and it is now a repeat of somebody that you already had. It's Jaden Greathouse. I'm on board with Jaden Greathouse being a dude, to be honest with you. And I do think that Chris Mitchell is going to get a lot of attention, which I think is going to allow Jaden Greathouse to absolutely just dominate. I mean, he is going to have a year And you're right. He was clearly the best receiver that they had in the spring. And now that they've added some pieces and some parts and things like that, the gap has closed. But I still think he's going to be dominant. I really do. And even if they decide that he's the guy that they need to bracket and double, I think Mike Denbrock is going to be smart about moving him around and getting some advantageous matchups to allow Jaden Greathouse to continue his dominance, regardless of whatever a defense wants to do to him. I still think he's going to be that guy. And so he's my most outstanding for offense. Now, and the reason I don't have him as my MVP is because I do think that they are super deep at wide receiver, and I'm not saying they could replace him. That's different. I'm saying that they could. It won't be like a Grand
They're going to
Canyon
still be really
hole.
good if they.
Right.
Yes, there's not a single receiver they could lose that just devastates them the way that it was the case in the past.
Which is why I put him at most outstanding, and I don't have him as MVP, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So
totally agree. Totally
so that's my offensive guy. Most outstanding on the defense, I did go with Howard Cross III here. I don't have him anywhere else, and I also understand that the logic portion of the program doesn't make sense here, since I have Riley Mills as my most outstanding lineman. I get it. Logic and I don't usually run into the same bar together. But so Howard Cross III, I think, kind of for the same reason that Riley Mills is going to have a good year. Look, Howard Cross came back for a reason, right? He's got some unfinished business that he wants to take care of. He's motivated. He's got a chip on his shoulder. There's certain things that he wants to do. I think, I don't know that he could have a better season than he had last year. I don't know if that's possible, right? Because his stature is going to prevent him from maybe being that top interior lineman picked in the draft and some things like that. That's all out of his control, right? But I think if he stacks two really good seasons, two elite seasons on top of each other, then I think some teams are going to not ignore that, but be like, oh, well, you know what? This wasn't a one-year fluke. This is something that he can do on a regular basis. And so I think that he is going to kind of elevate himself in that way. And so I think he has some things to prove. And so I that's why I have Howard Cross here.
Quick interjection. Sadly, sad to report that Christian Garay's middle name does not start with a B.
Oh,
I really thought.
At least you get me for part 3.
Yeah, it's close. It starts with an A. Does not start with a B.
All right.
So
that's hilarious, by the way.
So unfortunately, there's not. I mean, Christian and then his middle name and then Gray. There's no B's in there. So I'm going to have to talk to his mom, and we're going to have to maybe legally get an additional middle name thrown in there for the purposes of this season.
That's so funny.
So no B in Christian Gray. He's the one outlier to that conversation. Vince, my most outstanding guy is Riley Mills. I went all Rileys on most outstanding. I'm going Riley on both sides of the ball.
True.
So I went Riley Leonard on offense, Riley Mills on defense for the same reasons I talked about before. I just think he's going to be a huge force. And again, I just think it comes down to, I think Benjamin Morrison could end up being their best overall player, most dominant player, best player. But I think you can avoid him. And I think teams are going to avoid him like the plague this season.
Exactly.
Which is going to limit his direct impact.
Sure.
The thing about a guy like Riley Leonard is he can not only be impacted by how teams have to defend him and how that helps his teammates, but then he is going to have a chance to make more plays.
Right.
And that's why I went with him as most outstanding. It's just because I just don't know that Benjamin, like when I talk about best skill player, I can just talk about just dominance at your position. They couldn't catch any balls on him and that kind of stuff. And you just avoid him the whole game. Like, why didn't Benjamin give up any throws this game? Because they never threw at him. They're going to have games like that, I think, this year. But I just feel like Riley Mills is just poised for a big-time season. But you could easily have picked Benjamin Morrison in this conversation as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Just most outstanding. And I actually don't have Howard Cross on any of these, which to me is not because I'm underrating Howard Cross. It's just that's how good I think this defense is going to be. And he doesn't apply for a lot of these. But it also comes down to, because of the impact or the breakout that I'm anticipating from Riley Mills.
Sure.
I think that's kind of where he is. So I'm going Riley Mills. And I just think both of these two guys, part of the reason I went with them too, Vince, is a little bit of projection, because I started thinking about, like, who playing at their highest level has the biggest impact on this team? And it came down to those two, Riley Leonard and Riley Mills. I just think those two guys, if they play to their potential, have a bigger impact on success week after week than anybody else. A dominant 3 technique and a dominant quarterback are, two recipes to a championship that a team needs. Not saying Notre Dame, just in general, that a team needs for most teams. And that's why, partly why I went with those two guys as well, to be honest with you.
Final award to give out. MVP, most valuable player. You kind of laid out your criteria for the difference between outstanding and valuable. I completely agree. I'm very, very secure in my decision, but do you want to lead off the MVP talk?
Go ahead.
So from an MVP standpoint, most valuable to the team, this is where I went with Riley Leonard. And for everything that I said before when I was talking about Riley Leonard, he's going to be such an integral part in the run game, especially early on. I think he's going to be an integral part in the pass game. He's the one throwing the ball. He's just dynamic. He's a dynamic athlete. I think he's a dynamic personality within the team, which I think is a huge part of it. I think he is super valuable to this team, which is an interesting thing to say when he's only been here since January, but I feel like he's already made his mark with this team. And I'm not going to be in any way surprised if he's got a C on his jersey as a captain. I think he is an absolutely valuable piece of this offense and this team. So I think it transcends offense and defense. I think he's a leader on this team. He's super laid back. I think he's an easy guy to follow. I feel really good about him in this role. Now, they've got a lot of talent in the quarterback room. We've talked about this, but we've also talked about the fact that if Riley Leonard goes down, then so do the expectations of the team to a degree, depending on, who is inserted. And so that's why I think he's most valuable to the team. I think his absence directly affects the win-losses for this team. So Riley Leonard's my MVP.
I don't disagree with anything you just said. I think he's brilliant. I went somewhere else, though. Partly because I didn't necessarily want to have the same guy for most outstanding and most valuable.
Totally get that.
And mine is Mitchell Evans. And here's why I'm going Mitchell Evans.
I like that. I wanted to find a spot for him in this, and I couldn't.
Here's why I go with Mitchell Evans, because is he going to be their most dynamic? No. Is he going to necessarily be their best skill guy that you look at the NFL draft and he was taken higher than anybody else? No. Is he going to lead the team in catches? Probably not. Is he going to lead the team in yards? Probably not. Is he going to lead the team in touchdowns? Probably not. But I don't know if there's another skill player that can have a greater impact on everything around him than Mitchell Evans. And what I mean by that is, Mike Denbrock had some very good tight ends over the years. I don't know that he's had one that is potentially as good as what Mitchell Evans can be. And if Mitchell Evans is able to step up and be as good as he was last year for an entire season, even if he misses the first couple games, but then comes back and he's healthy, if they have him for the second half of the year and the postseason and he's playing like he was last year before he got hurt, that has such an impact on this football team. It's harder to defend the run game. It's harder to defend the read zone. Because now you could potentially have situations where Mitchell Evans is to the right and they're running read zone where Riley's running to the left. And it's kind of like you're now middle of your field is worried about all that stuff. It impacts how you defend the running backs in the pass game. Like, can you really put your best safety / linebacker / nickel on Jaden Greathouse or Jeremiah Love if Mitchell Evans is ripping you up? It impacts your outside receivers. 3rd and 7, your safeties are peeking a little bit down more into the box to defend number 88. And, oh, shoot, we didn't give enough help to number 10 running that post right over top, or number 5 or number 1 or number 11 or number 6 or number 83. You get what I'm saying? I think Mitchell Evans is that guy that is just going to be – he's like that final glue piece. He's not their most talented. He's not their most outstanding. He's very good, and he is talented. Don't get me wrong. But he's not so much head and shoulders above everyone else like Michael Mayer was, partly because the roster around him is better than it was when Michael Mayer was here 2 years ago. It's just overall, I think he brings something that, and honestly, as much as I love the next 2 tight ends, I don't think they impact the game this year as much as the way Mitchell can. Like if you take Jeremiah Love away from the backfield, he's, most outstanding or breakout or wherever you want to put him, he's going to be dynamic. But if they lose him and it's Jadarian Price and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams and Devin Ford, you're still pretty flipping good at running back. You said it at receiver. If you lose Chris Mitchell, you still have Jordan Faison and KK Smith and Cam Williams. If you lose Jaden Greathouse, you still have Jaden Harrison. You can easily move Jordan Faison into the slot. You can move Jaden Thomas over to the slot. You have a lot of guys who can play slot. If you lose Jaden Thomas in the boundary, you've got Bo Collins and Micah Gilbert. If you lose Bo Collins, you still have Jaden Thomas and Micah Gilbert. Quarterback and tight end are the two positions where I think you have a guy at that position that can just do things that nobody else on the roster can do at that position and impact the game in a way that nobody else can do at that position. That's just kind of why I went with Mitchell Evans there. If he's healthy and productive, he has an impact on this offense that makes Notre Dame incredibly difficult to depend because of what they have around him.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I look at it.
I dig it.
His ability just think about how he was against Ohio State last year. Just some of the plays he made against Ohio State and how dominant he was. I mean, you take him off Notre Dame's team last year, they don't beat Duke.
Right.
Because they're not in position for it to even be a game that's a 1-point game on that final drive anyway. He was their offense against Duke last year. His numbers against Louisville ended up being pretty good, Vince, even though they had a 30-plus yard gain taken away from him where he smoked the defense for a 30-yard gain. It got called back because you had a penalty on Blake Fisher. His numbers would have been even better at that point in time. And I just look at him and I think if he's going off, he has such an incredible impact on the entire team that I just don't know that anybody outside of Riley Leonard brings a more impactful nature to it as far as value. And that's kind of why I went with him. And again, you could have easily gone Riley Leonard, but to your point, I didn't want to have the same guy.
No, I get it.
As after I get done saying, there's a difference between most valuable. And then I'm like, okay, who is your MVP and who's your MOP? And for both of them, it's like the same dude. It's like, okay, dude, maybe you should shut up. So that's how it's all
good. That's going to do it for part 2 of our.
We didn't do defense.
MVP is most valuable for the whole team. Yeah. That's why I did it.
No, we're going offense and defense.
Did not have a defensive one. So,
well, I'll answer mine, and I think you're going to agree with mine.
Okay,
Xavier Watts, and there's a lot of reasons why.
Yep.
Is he an outstanding player?
That's
yes,
where I would have gone.
Is he a guy that can impact the game and can he impact the pass game and the run game? Absolutely. Is he a leader on the defense? Absolutely. But here's the other thing: when you talk about value, nobody on the at the safety position can do what he does. I think Benjamin Morrison might be their best defensive player. I think him and Christian Gray are very similar players. He's just a year older. And if you lose Benjamin, that would suck, but you're not going to be crushed because you do have a Christian Gray that you can slide into that spot.
Right.
If you lose Xavier Watts, the safety position takes a huge, huge step back. And then when you do have him, the impact he has on your defense as a whole is huge. Because the way he played the game last year, it changes how you attack Notre Dame.
100%.
It does. And he'll force you into mistakes to someone else because you don't want to throw at him. I can maybe fit that ball in there, but man, Xavier Watts is right over there. I don't know if I want to do that because he'll not only pick passes off, but what he also showed last year, if you make any kind of mistake, slightly sail a ball against a tight end, USC, right? Ball gets tipped, Clemson. He's there to pick it off and do damage with it. And that's the thing is he doesn't just pick passes off. He picks them off and goes with them. And then he goes back to his old receiver days. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing I look at with Xavier Watts and say that kid brings value. But the other thing is if there's one player on the entire defense, Xavier Watts last year had 137 yards on interception return yards last season, by the way. And he also had – well, they didn't count it, but he also had those return yards against USC that they didn't count, that he returned that one for a touchdown.
Oh, yeah.
So if there's one player on defense that you could say you can least afford to lose, where there's a big drop off between 1 and 2, it's field safety. It's Xavier Watts.
And that's the definition of MVP. Like that's why I picked Riley Leonard for offense, and that's why I would have picked and I guess did pick Xavier Watts for defense. Completely agree with you. You take him out of the mix, and that's a giant hole. That's a giant hole, right? And it's not saying anything negative about the guys that are on the depth chart or whatever, but he's an established All-American, best defensive player in the country. You lose him, that's massive.
Well,
massive.
And they're just not in the depth chart is not in a position where you can afford to lose him.
Exactly.
I mean, what you do is you move either Adon or Rod Hurd over there, and those two start, and that's fine. But now your depth chart behind it is just not as good.
Agreed.
And that's a huge difference to me. So that is my prediction for who the most valuable player will be this year is Xavier Watts.
Beautiful. That is going to do it for part 2 of our show today, the superlatives, right? So make sure you check that out if you missed it. We do have another section coming up, so make sure you stay tuned. But in the meantime, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and of course, jump on the boards. boards.irishbreakdown.com. Always good stuff over there, and you'll never know about it if you're not a member. So boards.irishbreakdown.com.